He used to sit by the window for hours, not because the view held anything beautiful, but because the silence did. It was the south side of Chicago, and 11-year-old Dwyane Wade lived in a world where hope whispered soft and far away. Nights fell heavy over cracked sidewalks and flickering porch lights. Outside the glass, sirens moved like lullabies, long, aching songs that drifted past without ever looking up. A basketball hit cement somewhere in the distance, the rhythm unpredictable, like someone throwing it just to hear something move. Inside, Dwyane sat still. Sometimes, his face leaned against the cool window pane, not watching the world so much as hiding from it. He wasn't waiting for stardom. He was waiting for peace. The kind of peace that never quite arrived inside that small, dim room. Quiet became his armor. He didn't fight with fists or volume. He retreated inward, curled into the corners of his heart, and waited for the noise to pass. Outside, his mother, Jalinda, was losing battles with things he was too young to understand: addiction, time, her own ghosts. Inside, his father, Dwyane Sr., tried to build something steadier, but even steadiness can feel like stumbling when the past won't loosen its grip. They loved him, but love isn't always enough to make a boy feel safe, and so he watched through the glass, through the noise, through the late-night arguments and early morning silences. He watched and waited and wondered, was he meant for anything at all? Because in places like this, dreams don't grow like trees. They crack through pavement if they grow at all. It would have made sense for him to vanish into that silence, a flicker, like so many boys before him, swallowed by circumstance. But deep beneath the quiet, something stirred. He wasn't even sure what to call it, only that sometimes when he ran, when he moved, when he picked up that old worn basketball, something started to buzz. A flicker in the chest, a pull in the stomach, like possibility. Whispering his name. He didn't call it ambition. He didn't call it hunger. He didn't call it hope. He just knew. The world didn't feel so loud when the ball was in his hands, and so, little by little, he gave those hands something to do. Still too young to predict anything, still too small to be seen, but already burning, a quiet fire. Low and unseen, but fire, even when hushed, still finds a way to breathe. So, when the knock on his door came from his father, offering him a way out, a ride to Robbins, a fresh place to land, Dwyane didn't protest. He didn't cry. He didn't celebrate. He just packed light, stepped into the small car, and looked out the window, not back, forward. The city melted into silence again as they drove, but inside the boy's chest, something began to hum louder, not enough for anyone else to hear, not just yet, but the spark had already found its match. The pavement in Robbins wasn't even it cracked, in places where the earth had sighed too many times. Weeds grew between slabs of concrete, like little green rebellions. And in the center of it all, a makeshift hoop leaned just slightly to the left, nailed to a light pole that had long forgotten how to shine. Dwyane didn't care to him. It was home now, quieter home, tucked outside the chaos of the south side, where days unfolded slower and nights weren't so full of sirens. Here, in Robbins, the game didn't just happen, it echoed. The slap of sneakers against asphalt, the slap of palms against the ball, the slam of it all against silence that had once kept him hiding. Sometimes it was just him. Other times, his stepbrother Dimitri's joined, older, steadier, louder. They didn't talk much when they played. The dribbles spoke for them. It was cold, often, The kind of Midwest winter that made fingers numb before the second quarter of an imaginary game. But Dwyane stayed. Through numbness, through quiet, through nights when the only light came from a porch bulb to houses away, shivering against the wind. Basketball didn't promise escape. It didn't promise applause. It simply promised rhythm, something to hold on to. And so he dribbled. He shot, he missed, and then tried again. Not because he saw greatness, but because it was the first thing that answered him back without judgment at school. He didn't shine. At home, he kept his voice low. But here in this broken rectangle behind a row of houses, he became something else. Not confident, not yet, but alive. His jumper was awkward, his form unrefined, but his eyes never settled. They scanned, restless and observant, like he was always listening for the thing that would make sense, and when none of it did, he kept moving anyway. That was the beginning of his belief, not faith, not even full hope, just belief, that maybe, if he kept playing, something inside would grow strong enough to carry him through. People underestimate the power of repetition, the way it becomes a drumbeat in the soul. And for Dwyane, each layup that caromed off the rim was a reminder he was still here. Whenever the streetlights blinked on, he'd look up, face shining with sweat, hands red from cold. Demetres would nod, give him one more lob, maybe a word or two, again, and Dwyane would try again. Over time, the missed shots started to fall. The awkward steps became quicker. His silence remained, but inside it, a quiet pulse grew louder. At school, he didn't boast, didn't dominate. Sometimes he wasn't even picked first. But on the court, between the pulled nets and the scuffed backboards, something sacred stirred. Not fame, not fate, just that same wordless fire. Even before anyone noticed, before a coach winked, before a scout scribbled a note, some part of Dwyane Wade knew he wasn't like the others. It wasn't confidence, not quite, more like a hum inside the bones, that maybe he was meant to do more than disappear. Maybe the silence of his life wasn't a void, but a pause, one that would, one day, break open with sound. But for now, the ball hit pavement, thud, 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 a heartbeat beneath the winter sky, and slowly, the spark pressed on. Milwaukee was a city of frost and in-between days. Snow bordered sidewalks like forgotten quilts, and the lake's breath tangled through empty streets in the early mornings. Buildings huddled together in silence. The sky always seemed to be thinking, and somewhere inside that grey stillness, Dwyane Wade woke up. He had made it to Marquette, not with a bang, but more like a ripple uncertain, soft at the edges. There were no spotlights, no applause, just a campus, a class schedule, and a quiet gym that never slept. He couldn't play yet. His past had caught up academic gaps. The consequence of too much noise in childhood, too little help. And so, his first season passed without a single minute on the floor. But that year, that redshirt year, became something else entirely. It became a silence dense enough to grow in. He'd slip into the Al McGuire Center before most feet hit the pavement. The lights overhead sputtered on slowly, like they, too, needed time to believe. And there he was, long sleeves, headphones, repetition, layup, dribble, free throw. Again, no photographer waiting, no coach yelling, just the echo of the ball, bouncing back like it remembered who he was trying to be. Then came the tutoring sessions. Long, patient evenings in study halls and empty classrooms. Words that had once slipped away from him were now ironed out slowly. Vocabulary tests, writing drills, a second education, rebuilt from pieces. He didn't complain, didn't broadcast it, just kept going. Sometimes classmates didn't even know he was part of the team. He sat near the back, always polite, always tired, but inside, the hum from Robbins had only grown louder when people saw him walking across campus hood up. Face loath, they didn't see a future Final Four star. They just saw a young man trying to hold his days together. But then, one day, he played, and it was like a window had opened inside the building. He didn't glide so much as flicker flashes of speed. Balance, the kind of body control that didn't make sense for someone barely 6'4". When the ball left his hands, it looked like trust. When he drove, defenders flinched for reasons they couldn't name. He didn't shout. He didn't celebrate loud. He just walked quietly to the line, took his shots, ran back. But by that season's end, they all knew Marquette was winning. More than that, they believed. And in 2003, the belief turned into headlines. The team cut their way through March. Then came the Final Four, and Dwyane Wade gave them a moment. A triple-double-20, 9 points, 11 rebounds, 11 assists. For some, it felt impossible. But for him, it just felt like everything had finally caught up. The boy from Robbins, the one who stared through windows, now stared down defenses. And yet even in the highest moment, he remained folded inward. No chest thumping, no grand speeches, just one hand on the back of a teammate's jersey, one nod at the crowd, one breath, and then back to the game. He'd become something rare, not just talented, but tethered to the work, to the silence, to the pulse that never left him. They talked about him now, across campuses, in living rooms, but he still walked the halls the same way, backpack loose, hood up, headphones on, because greatness had only just begun to notice him, and Dwyane Wade was not finished. It felt like a hallway filled with echoes, a ballroom of dreams, half floating in nervous breath and pressed suits. The NBA draft was made of spotlights, soundtracks, and sleepless families. Names were called like wishes. Hopes sat beside mothers, beside agents, beside old wounds that hadn't quite healed. Dwyane Wade's name didn't ring out like a siren. It came in its own time, calm, measured. Third pick. Miami Heat. There was no explosion, no shouting, just that quiet nod. The one he gave himself before every game back at Marquette. Like he knew something else had begun, but didn't yet know its shape. He stood, hugs, handshakes, a new hat, but inside, that same hum, the same whisper from the streets of Robbins, the same weightless silence before a shot leaves your fingers. He didn't see Miami as a reward. He saw it as a continuation, because stories like his don't pause for celebration. They just keep unfolding at their own rhythm. South Beach was not a quiet place. The city moved at an entirely different beat, sunlight dancing through palm trees, ocean salt-baked into the sidewalks, a nightlife humming even when the court fell silent. But while the streets were loud, the Miami Heat was still searching for a star, for a leader, for legacy. Wade entered like he always did, quietly. No promises, no declarations, just sneakers laced tight, eyes low, breath steady. And then came the game. What he brought to the floor wasn't just skill, it was poetry written in muscle and balance and untouched angles. He moved not to impress, but to belong. Everything that had once been awkward now looked fated. The first time he cut through a defense, slipped between a screen, launched through contact Miami, leaned forward. Coaches stood up straighter. Teammates looked again, because something felt inevitable. Even as a rookie, Wade didn't ask for the ball. The ball found him in the open floor. He looked like water sliding past arms, gliding between shoulders, falling to the floor and rising like a tide. The same rhythm that used to echo on cracked sidewalk courts now beat through the arena, and people noticed, not in magazine spreads, not yet, but in whispers. Who is that? Where did he come from? How does he move like that? But it wasn't just movement. It was the silence between gestures. The way he rarely reacted. The way he kept everything close. Like joy and pain both belonged under the same breath. Pat Riley saw little need for speeches. He just watched a young man play the game like it was a secret written just for him, and slowly, piece by piece, the team began to turn in that direction. No declarations, no drama, only motion. But as Dwyane's star rose, so did the noise. Fans wanted wins. Pundits wanted explanations. Expectations wrapped around his name like vines. And still, he stayed small within it. He did what he always had. Played Rookie of the Month, game winners, a playoff berth no one thought they'd reach. Each headline bent slightly toward him. Still, he barely bent toward them, because somewhere, beneath the growing storm, Dwyane Wade carried that same window-light stillness. Same hands, same breath, same invisible fire. But the game does not let stars stay small forever. Behind closed doors, a conversation stirred that there was a force bigger than headlines, louder than any cheer. Sitting in Los Angeles with gold rings and unfinished business. His name was Shaquille O'Neal, and he was listening, not to Dwyane's voice, but to his rhythms too. The way he moved to the kind of player who didn't ask for attention, but pulled it anyway. To the kind of game that felt like something destiny could build around. So in the summer of 2004, the basketball world shifted, and the giant came. Shaq arrived in Miami not as the centerpiece, but as a pillar. Wade didn't flinch. He bowed only slightly, out of respect, not submission. Because even then, he knew this was not Shaq's team. Not yet, it wasn't anyone's team. It was becoming something new, and slowly, piece by piece, rhythm by rhythm. Dwyane Wade wasn't just on the team. He was becoming the pulse of it. They were losing, down to games to none, gasping under the weight of a final spotlight that felt more like a searchlight. The heat flashy, fearless, built like a team of destinies were being picked apart by Dirk and Dallas. Each possession ended in a long sigh. Each time out, a quiet panic behind tired eyes. But not behind Dwyane's, not behind the kid who once watched cold streets from warmer windows and learned that silence doesn't always mean surrender. He didn't speak louder in the huddles, didn't try to summon speeches. He just looked inward, like he always had, finding the thread of belief buried beneath the noise. And then, he played. Game 3 wasn't just a comeback. It was something gentler and more violent at once. There was no single moment, only a series of small, brutal decisions. Drives that seemed impossible. Falls that should have broken him. Finishes at the rim that left defenders blinking. He didn't do it with range or flair. He did it with angles you didn't see coming. With grit that rubbed against every possession. With a presence too still to describe and too loud to ignore. 32 points, then 46, then 43. Game 3, Game 4, Game 5, he rose, and the team rose with him. He took fouls that felt like collisions with ghosts, slammed to the floor again and again only, to pull himself up as if insulted by gravity. "They can't stop him," one broadcaster whispered during Game 5. But that wasn't quite it, because stopping someone implies knowing where they'll go, and Wade moved like water, slipping through contact, sliding into space, splitting seconds like pages in a book only he knew how to read. Dallas doubled him, tripled him, sent taller bodies, longer arms. It didn't matter. Not because he was the best player on the floor, but because he had something they hadn't accounted for. He had survived too much to be rattled by a finals deficit. This wasn't pressure. This was peace. Because when he stepped on that floor, he wasn't 11 anymore, sitting by a window in Chicago. He wasn't the kid missing layups on cracked asphalt. Wasn't the unknown recruit redshirting in Milwaukee. He was all of them burned into one. And by Game 6, the answer was clear. Dwyane Wade wasn't just having a finals performance. He was writing 1.1 that wouldn't be forgotten. The Heat raised the trophy on a court soaked in joy. Shaq smiled wide. Riley lifted a fist. Confetti fell with the softness of endings and the finality of receipts stamped in gold. But Wade, he didn't scream. He stood center stage, quietly clutching the MVP trophy. He didn't need to say a word, because now everyone had heard him, and for the first time, even the mighty, unfeeling machine that churns through stars and moments, paused, closed its eyes, listened. They called it a breakout, a Stardom born in June. But for Dwyane Wade, it wasn't a beginning. It was a confirmation. The world had finally caught up to a fire that had been burning for years beneath the surface, low, slow, stubborn. One he never had to light, only protect. And now, with a ring on his hand, and the game bowed gently in his direction, he knew this whisper, this hum, this pulse. It wasn't going away, not yet. The body keeps score, even when the scoreboard forgets. And after 2006, Dwyane Wade's body began to speak up. At first, it was a whisper. Sore knee here, a stiff shoulder there. Nothing unbearable. Just old reminders dressed in new pain. But pain doesn't always arrive with warning. Sometimes it waits, and then rushes in all at once. The falls, once followed by clean get-ups, began to require a second breath. The collisions hurt longer, the bruises settled deeper, and behind every high-flying finish, there was a landing that echoed louder than it used to. Miami still loved him, the league still watched him, but fame doesn't heal tendons. Applause doesn't mend ligaments, and the game, as much as it had given now, began to ask harder questions. Surgeries came, one, then another after that, shoulders carved open, knees cleaned out, and each time the road back felt longer. Like it wasn't just about steps, but about stealing something from time. People started saying small things on TV. He's aging. He's not what he was. They said them in passing, like flicking dust from their sleeves. But he heard them, not with anger, just with silence. Because he, more than anyone, already knew what it felt like to lose a moment of yourself. Still, he played, maybe not as explosive, maybe not as swift, but with a different kind of beauty, one that came from choosing the right angles instead of forcing the wrong ones, from seeing the pass half a second sooner, from trusting the game more than fighting it. He changed, adjusted, grew wiser. Shorter minutes, Smarter shots, fewer drives, but deeper cuts. And yet, the audience grew restless. They remembered 2006 like it was owed to them every night. The myth had birthed expectations that no man could live inside forever. That's the price of a finals. MVP at 2-4. You no longer get to have a quiet game. The jersey still sold. The banners still hung. But nights felt heavier. Losses stung more. The fire hadn't gone out, but the wood beneath it was thinning. Still, he stayed, because he wasn't chasing glory anymore. He was guarding something. His name, his voice, in the locker room, the sweat left on that floor. Because legacy to him wasn't just what they said when you retired. It was what you endured while no one was watching. And then, slowly, the fatigue began to carry new conversations. What comes next? How do you keep playing when the game keeps changing? When running hurts? When jumping takes more preparation than impulse? When you're still a star, but not the galaxy? Then one day, the phone rang, not as surprise, but as suggestion across the country, high on another court. Another whisper had grown louder. LeBro, and another one beside him. Chris, 3 friends, 3 talents, 3 stories waiting to combine. Not for comfort, but for something bigger. A reason to start again, different, complicated, brave. They weren't proposing nostalgia, they were preparing a storm. And in that call, with his body sore and his name beginning to fall from headlines, Dwyane asked himself just one thing: could he make room for something greater than himself? Because coming together would mean letting go of leading every night, letting go of being the first option, the lone savior, the unquestioned face. But the truth was he'd carried that weight long enough, and maybe greatness didn't always mean more. Sometimes it meant less spotlight, less applause, more trust. So he packed his bags, recentered his fire, and stepped into a future that didn't require him to be everything, only something. He was no longer rising alone, but he didn't need to, because sometimes the greatest act of leadership is the decision to share the light, even if the cost is standing slightly in its shadow. And that was a sacrifice Dwyane Wade was ready to make. The noise came fast. It sounded like stadium roars and televised. Outrage like jerseys burning in northern streets, and headlines that bent toward betrayal. The summer of 2010 cracked the sport open. LeBron chose Miami, Chris Bosh followed, and suddenly, the Heat weren't just a team. They were a threat, a symbol, a target. Dwyane Wade stood in the middle of it all, not as the louder voice, but as the first. They were entering his house, but he didn't pound his chest. He opened the door, because he knew something the world didn't, not yet. That greatness doesn't always grow in solitude. Sometimes it needs kinship. Sometimes it needs heat stacked on heat. But the welcome came at a cost. Miami wasn't just Wade's anymore. It was shared now. And so, the role shifted. The face on the mural became 3 faces. The spotlight he once stood beneath alone, uncertain now splintered. He wasn't the leading scorer every night, wasn't the hero in every final frame, but he smiled anyway, because he had chosen it. He had chosen less shine for more firepower, less ego for more rings. He had stepped down, not out, and in doing so, made room for something rare in sports, a dynasty with roots deeper than numbers. The first year was rocky. Expectations suffocated every win. Every loss was a referendum. Commentators circled like sharks. Opposing crowds chanted, cackled, pointed fingers. But during those early storms, Wade held fast. He was the steady drumbeat beneath LeBron's evolving brilliance, the calming force. In huddles flaring with frustration, he showed them how to win not just games but each other, because talent doesn't always equal peace and chemistry. Takes time. He gave them that time. He gave them trust. And a season later, the Storm began to organize. 2012 wasn't just a championship. It was a reckoning. A statement not shouted, but proven frame by frame. They moved like dancers. Now LeBron the crown, Bosh the curve, and Wade the rhythm in between. Each step felt choreographed by trust. Each win more symphony than solo. And still he didn't seek credit. He sought balance. In 2013, they defended the title, won again, not with ease, but with resolve that had been born during colder years. Through missed games and hushed rehab sessions, the Big Three stood atop the world, arms raised. But beneath that pose, Wade's knees ached. The price was paid in silence, in drained ice baths, in shortened practices, in the quiet hurt that lingers where cartilage once cushioned impact. He sacrificed touches, sacrificed numbers, sacrificed the shape of his own legacy beneath someone else's expanding myth. But that was never the point, because even in shadow, he served the light. Still, time doesn't beg for patience. By 2014, the cracks widened. The Spurs took the finals and took them firmly. The dynasty wobbled, and just like that, the magic began to loosen. LeBron went home, Chris stayed, but his body began to send warnings of its own. And Wade, standing in the quiet aftermath, knew the moment had ended. But what lingered meant more. People remember the wins, remember the alley-oops, the parades, the headlines that screamed about super teams. But what few saw was the humility it took to build it, to step aside when the light shifted, to lift others without losing grip on yourself. That takes more than talent, it takes care, intention, grace, and Dwyane Wade bore all three. He had never wanted to be the loudest, only lasting, and now, as the super team chapter closed behind him, he looked toward a future that felt unfamiliar. Because in the space, success leaves behind, silence returns, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure what it would say. The plane touched down in Chicago, not with thunder, but with a hush. This was home. The start, the wound, the memory, where the window first taught him about silence, and the ball first taught him how to answer it. Coming back wasn't triumph, it was a question. He wore the jersey of his city now, his name above it. But something didn't fit. Not quite. The locker room didn't hum the same. The floorboards didn't remember his rhythm. And he older now, stitched in places only quiet nose moved, like someone borrowing time from a song he used to know by heart. The crowd clapped. The banners welcomed, but he was not theirs. Not anymore. He smiled, of course. That same humble, neck-bent smile, kissed his sons on the head, gave out daps, gave in to moments. But inside, he knew, not every journey forward is meant to give answers. Some are meant to remind you why you left. So he laced his shoes, took the floor, played with what was left in the tank, and then he packed his bags again. Cleveland came next, in a blur of names and numbers, trade machines and analyst segments. He barely remembers how the jersey felt, but he remembers this, that feeling, the one just behind the ribs, that something wasn't over yet, not here, not like this, because there was still a pair of palm trees, In his chest, still a song waiting back where everything had once begun. So, when the word came, Miami Heat didn't hesitate. Not this time. He returned, like rain on familiar pavement. Gentle, certain, long awaited. The moment his foot touched that floor again, the crowd rose without instruction. Like they had paused this breath for years. Finally, exhaled as one dot. One last season they called it a farewell tour. But for him it wasn't about goodbye. It was about thank you for the late nights, the banners, the bruises, the belief. And so, one by one, he gave something back. A crossover, a reverse layup, a mid-range jumper that bent against time. The body was slower now, but the instinct, sharp as ever. Each night in a different city, whispers followed him. He's back. He still got it. Maybe he did, or maybe it didn't matter anymore. Because now, the game wasn't about proving. It was about closing, not shutting doors. Just softly locking them behind you, so nothing escapes but light. Near the end, he dropped 30 on the Warriors. Hit a bank shot buzzer beater that made the internet blink in disbelief. The fire hadn't left. It had just lowered its voice. His final home game arrived like dusk. People dressed in tribute. Former teammates lined the courtside seats. Family pressed palms in prayer and awe. He started. Played like time was briefly convinced to pause. And at the end, he stood on the scorer's table, arms wide, head bowed not in glory, but in grace. Because this wasn't the end of a player, it was the end of a rhythm only he had mastered. He spoke softly in the post-game, said he felt peace, and perhaps, for the first time since that boy stared through cracked glass in Chicago, he truly did. There were no rings given that night, no MVP chants shaking rafters, only love, layered and earned and thick in the air like incense. And then, like all beautiful things, it was over. But not gone, because some legacies don't live on highlight reels. They live in the pauses between greatness, in the silence between threes, in the echo of a layup kissed gently off glass, and the way it lands without ripples. Dwyane Wade didn't rewrite the rules. He just reminded us what grace looks like with a jersey on. Even now, when the arena darkens, when the spotlights shift to other names, listen closely and you'll hear it. That soft hum, that quiet fire, still burning, still here.